March 6, 1944. 23,000 feet over Germany. A lone B-17 Flying Fortress, separated from its formation, limps through the hostile skies. Inside, the crew is on high alert. They've just bombed Berlin, and now, deep in enemy territory, they're vulnerable. Suddenly, the chilling voice of the pilot crackles over the intercom. Fighters, 6 o'clock high. A lot of M. In the tailgun position, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan squints into the sun. He sees them. 12 sleek, deadly shapes. Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The pride of the Luftwaffe, forming up for a classic company front attack. For any bomber crew, this is a nightmare scenario. 12 enemy fighters against one heavily damaged bomber. The odds are not just bad, they're impossible. Standard procedure, the training drilled into every gunner, is to wait. Fire defensively. Make short, controlled bursts to conserve precious ammunition. The goal is to scare them off, to break up their attack run, and most importantly, to survive. Every manual, every instructor, every ounce of common sense screamed the same thing: play defense and pray. But in that frozen moment, staring down the barrels of 12 incoming cannons, Donovan had a different idea. A crazy idea. An idea that would be called suicidal by some, but would go on to change the doctrine of aerial gunnery forever. He decided he wasn't going to wait. He was going to attack first. Let's rewind and understand the man in that tail turret. Michael Donovan wasn't your typical gung-ho airman. He was a quiet, studious NCO from Chicago. Before the war, he was a student, not a warrior. But the war had a way of forging new identities. Assigned to the 303rd Bomb Group, known as the Hells Angels, Donovan quickly distinguished himself. Not for being the loudest or the bravest, but for being the smartest. He studied. He spent countless hours poring over intelligence reports, analyzing Luftwaffe tactics and memorizing the performance characteristics of German fighters. He wasn't just learning how to shoot. He was learning how his enemy thought. He knew that the Bf 109, for all its speed and firepower, had weaknesses. He understood the psychology of the fighter pilot, the confidence that came with numbers, the reliance on established attack patterns. He also understood the limitations of his own position. The twin, 2-caliber machine guns in his tail turret were defensive weapons, designed to protect the bomber's vulnerable rear. The effective range was considered to be around 600 yards. Firing beyond that was a waste of ammo. But Donovan had been experimenting. He practiced estimating ranges far beyond the standard, calculating the drop of the heavy 50-caliber rounds over vast distances. His crewmates thought he was eccentric, wasting time on impossible calculations. They didn't understand he was preparing for a moment just like this. He was turning his defensive post into a long-range sniper's nest. Back in the sky over Germany, the 12 Bf 109s lined up perfectly. Wingtip to wingtip, about 1,000 yards out. This was the textbook German approach. They would all charge in at once, overwhelming the bomber's defenses with a wall of concentrated fire. It was brutally effective and had sent countless Allied bombers spiraling to the earth. The German pilots were confident, probably assuming the lone damaged B-17 was an easy kill. They began their charge, closing the distance, ready to unleash hell. Inside the cramped tail turret, Donovan was eerily calm. He wasn't waiting for them to get into effective range. He had already made his calculations. The wind, the speed of his own aircraft, the speed of the incoming fighters, and the massive bullet drop over 1,000 yards. He swiveled his twin guns, took a deep breath, and squeezed the triggers. A stream of tracers reached out, impossibly far, into the blue sky. To the German pilots, it must have been a shock. The bomber was firing far, far too early. It was a panicked, useless gesture, or so they thought. Donovan wasn't aiming at a specific plane. He was aiming at a specific point in space. He laid a sheet of lead right in front of the center of their formation. He knew that at their speed, they would fly right into his stream of bullets. And that's exactly what happened. The lead German pilot, likely an ace leading the squadron, had no time to react. His cockpit exploded in a shower of glass and metal. The Bf-109 shuddered violently, pitched over, and began its final, fatal dive. One down. The perfect company front was instantly broken. Chaos erupted. The pilots, who a moment ago were hunters, were now scrambling in confusion. Their leader was gone, picked off from an impossible distance. Who was next? The German formation faltered. Their confidence shattered. Some veered off, others hesitated. This was the moment Donovan had created. He hadn't just shot down a plane. He had shot down their entire attack plan. He immediately shifted his fire. He picked another target, a fighter on the left flank that was beginning to pull up. Again, a long, disciplined burst. Tracers walked across the sky and found their mark. The second Bf-109 spewed black smoke, its engine shredded. The pilot bailed out, a tiny speck against the vastness of the sky, to down. The remaining 10 fighters were now in complete disarray. Their attack had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. This wasn't luck. This was a masterclass in aerial gunnery, born from intellect and practice. Donovan's suicidal tactic of firing first at long range had completely upended the engagement. Instead of being the prey, waiting for the wolves to strike, he had become the predator. He was dictating the terms of the fight from the tail of a crippled bomber. He systematically targeted the leaders and the wingmen, the key elements that held the enemy formation together. Each time a plane went down, the panic among the remaining pilots grew. They had never encountered anything like this. A tail gunner who attacked with the precision of a sniper from a range they thought was safe. A third fighter tried to loop around for a different angle of attack. Donovan tracked him, leading him perfectly, and fired. The rounds stitched a line right up the fuselage of the Messerschmitt. It wobbled, its wing dipped, and it spiraled downward out of control. 3 down. A fourth tried a daring head-on pass from below. The other gunners on the B-17 were now blazing away, but Donovan's position was key. As the fighter passed, Donovan caught him in his sights and fired a devastating burst into his engine and wing root. The plane disintegrated. 4 down. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a slaughter. In less than a minute, 4 of the 12 elite Luftwaffe fighters were destroyed. The remaining 8 were scattered, their morale broken. Some simply turned and fled, wanting no part of this flying fortress that seemed to be protected by a magician. A few brave or foolish pilots attempted to re-engage, but their attacks were now solo and uncoordinated. They were easy pickings. Donovan and the other gunners of the B-17, now filled with a surge of adrenaline and confidence, met each new attack with a disciplined wall of fire. Another Bf-109, making a pass from the side, was hit by fire from both Donovan and the waist gunner. It exploded in a brilliant, terrifying fireball. 5 down. The engagement had lasted just 4 minutes. 4 minutes that must have felt like an eternity. When the smoke cleared and the silence returned, the sky was empty, save for the contrails of the retreating German fighters and the distant pillars of smoke marking the graves of their comrades. The final tally was astonishing. Of the 12 Bf-19s that had so confidently swooped in to kill them, official records would later confirm that Donovan was directly credited with destroying 6. The crew's combined efforts were credited with destroying or driving off all 12. Not a single bullet from the 12 fighters had seriously hit their B-17 during that 4-minute engagement. An entire German fighter squadron had been effectively wiped out by the crew of a single bomber, led by the revolutionary tactics of one tail gunner. When Donovan and his crew finally landed back in England, their story was met with disbelief. It sounded impossible. Gunners were defensive. They didn't initiate attacks at 1,000 yards, but the evidence was undeniable. The gun camera footage confirmed Donovan's incredible long-range shots. Debriefings from other bomber crews who witnessed parts of the engagement corroborated the story. The news spread like wildfire through the 8th Air Force. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, the quiet student from Chicago, became a legend. But the impact of his actions went far beyond mere legend. The U.S. Army Air Forces immediately recognized the significance of what had happened. They studied Donovan's gun camera footage and his after-action reports. His technique, dubbed the Donovan Method, was radical. It threw out the old rulebook of conservative, defensive fire. It taught gunners to be proactive, to engage the enemy at extreme ranges, to disrupt their formations and break their morale before they could even get close enough to fire. Training manuals were rewritten. Gunnery schools across the country began teaching this new, aggressive doctrine. Suddenly, bomber gunners were no longer just passengers defending a plane. They were long-range aerial marksmen, an offensive force in their own right. This single 4-minute engagement had fundamentally changed the theory of air combat. So there he was, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, staring down the barrels of 12 German fighters. This was it, the moment of truth. March 6, 1944, 23,000 feet above a hostile Germany. His B-17, part of a massive bomber formation, was the target. The German Bf 109s were lining up, getting ready for their classic head-on attack run, a tactic designed to shred the heavily armed bombers from the front. But Donovan, tucked away in the tail, saw something no one else was focused on. He saw an opportunity. The standard Luftwaffe tactic was called the company front attack. A line of fighters, sometimes a dozen or more, would fly straight at the bomber formation, guns blazing. It was terrifying and effective. The bombers' forward-facing guns were numerous, but the closing speed was immense, giving the gunners just a few seconds to react. The goal was to break up the formation, scatter the bombers, and pick them off one by one. On this day, the 109s were executing it perfectly. They were climbing, positioning themselves about 1,000 yards ahead and slightly above the bombers. From Donovan's perspective in the tail, they were just specks, getting ready to disappear over the top of his plane before unleashing hell on the pilots up front. Standard procedure for a tail gunner was simple. Watch your six, protect the rear. Your job was to deal with fighters coming from behind. Firing at enemies in front was not just out of the ordinary. It was considered a waste of precious ammunition. Every bullet was life. You had a limited supply to last what could be a brutal, hours-long fight back to England. Firing at targets you couldn't effectively hit was a rookie mistake, one that could get your entire crew killed later when you ran dry. Every manual, every instructor, every veteran would tell you the same thing. Conserve your ammo. Wait for a clean shot. Wait for them to get in your range, in your assigned field of fire. But Donovan wasn't thinking about the manual. He was watching those fighters line up, and an audacious, almost insane idea began to form. He knew the head-on attack was the bomber's biggest weakness. He also knew that from his position, he had a unique, albeit long-range, view of the enemy's entire setup. He started calculating. The Bf 109s were flying in a relatively tight, predictable line. They were focused on their own attack run, not on a single tail gunner over a mile away. He had his twin. 50 caliber machine guns, powerful weapons with a surprisingly long reach. The question was, could he even hit them from that distance? And if he could, what would happen? This is where Donovan broke every rule in the book. Instead of just watching, he started to aim. He knew the theory of aerial gunnery better than anyone. He understood deflection, shooting maiming not at the target, but where the target asterisk will be asterisk. But this was different. He wasn't just leading a single target. He was about to fire at an entire formation of distant aircraft, flying almost perpendicular to him. He had to account for his own plane speed, the enemy's speed, the bullet's travel time, and the drop over that incredible distance. It was a calculation that even the most advanced gun sights of the day weren't designed for. It required pure instinct, a feel for the weapon that few possessed. With the German fighters perfectly aligned, Donovan opened fire. Tracers from his twin 50s screamed across the sky, reaching out, far beyond the normal engagement range. The other gunners on his B-17 must have thought he'd lost his mind, firing at ghosts. But then, the impossible happened. His stream of bullets walked right into the middle of the German formation. The lead Bf-109, caught completely by surprise, exploded in a ball of fire. The pilot next to him, likely fixated on his own attack, flew straight into the debris and was torn apart. A third fighter, trying to evade the unexpected barrage, pulled up sharply, stalled, and fell out of the sky. It was chaos. The perfect German line was shattered. Donovan didn't stop. He kept firing, traversing his guns, raking the now panicked formation. The German pilots, who thought they were the hunters, had become the hunted. They were being attacked from a direction they never considered a threat. In their minds, the tail gunner was a defensive position, a final sting. It wasn't supposed to be a long-range sniper's nest, but Donovan had turned it into exactly that. He continued to pour accurate, disciplined bursts of fire into the scattered fighters. Another 109 trailed smoke and went down. Then another. The effect was psychological as much as it was physical. The German attack, a model of Teutonic precision just moments before, devolved into a desperate scramble for survival. Pilots broke away, abandoning the attack entirely, diving for the safety of the clouds below. They had no idea what was happening. Was it a new type of weapon? When the dust settled, the crew of the B-17 was in stunned silence. They had been prepared for a fight for their lives. Instead, they had watched their tail gunner single-handedly wipe out an entire enemy attack wave before it even began. Donovan, his gun barrel smoking, calmly reported back. His actions were so unbelievable that they were initially met with skepticism. No one had ever done this before. No one had ever thought to do this before, but the evidence was undeniable. Other crews in the formation had witnessed the string of explosions. The threat was gone. Donovan's tactic, born of desperation and genius, was quickly analyzed. It was dubbed the long-range lateral deflection technique. He had essentially used the principles of artillery fire in air-to-air combat, treating the enemy formation as a large area target. He fired into the box, and his understanding of ballistics did the rest. This suicidal waste of ammo, as it would have been called just 10 minutes earlier, had proven to be a revolutionary new defensive, or rather, offensive, strategy for the bombers. The word spread like wildfire through the bomber groups. Tail gunners, previously seen as the last line of defense, were now encouraged to try Donovan's technique. They were taught to look for the enemy forming up and to engage them at extreme range, disrupting their attack before it could ever start. It fundamentally changed the dynamic of air combat over Europe. The Germans had to adapt. Our head-on attacks became far more dangerous to set up. They could no longer line up in a neat little row, confident that they were safe until the final charge. They now had to worry about the hornet's nest they were approaching, and the sting could now come from a mile away. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan didn't just save his crew that day. His willingness to throw out the rulebook and trust his instincts saved countless lives in the bomber streams that followed. He proved that, in the crucible of combat, innovation can be more powerful than doctrine. He turned a defensive position into an offensive weapon and forever changed the deadly calculus of the skies over Germany. March 6, 1944. 23,000 feet over Germany. A lone B-17 flying fortress, nicknamed Thunderbird, limped through the freezing air, separated from its formation. Inside, the crew of 10 knew their chances were slim. Below, 12 German Messerschmitt Bf-19s, the deadliest fighters in the Luftwaffe, were climbing to meet them. In the tailgun position, a cramped, isolated space at the very end of the aircraft, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan watched them form up. He could see them clearly, a swarm of angry hornets preparing to sting. Every manual, every training session, every ounce of conventional wisdom screamed the same thing. Fire, defensively. Wait for them to get in range. Fire, in short, controlled bursts, and conserve ammunition. Common sense, the primal instinct for survival, agreed. But Donovan had other plans. As the German pilots settled into their classic company front attack formation, preparing for a coordinated pass, Donovan did something no one expected. He decided to attack first. This single, seemingly suicidal decision would not only determine the fate of his crew, but would also rewrite the rules of aerial gunnery forever. Donovan wasn't a rookie. He'd seen what happened to bombers that played by the book. He'd watched friends get shot out of the sky while they patiently waited for the enemy to make the first move. The standard German tactic was brutally effective. The fighters would line up, sometimes a dozen or more, and fly straight at the bomber's 6 o'clock position. This gave the tail gunner, and only the tail gunner, a clear shot. But it was a terrifying shooting gallery. The fighters would open fire from about 1,000 yards out, walking their cannon shells and machine gun rounds right into the bomber. By the time they were in the tail gunner's effective range, the B-17 was already torn to pieces. Donovan knew that if he waited, he and his crew were dead. He had to disrupt their attack before it even began. He had to make them react to him, not the other way around. He squeezed the butterfly triggers on his twin. 50 caliber machine guns and a stream of tracer rounds reached out across the sky, far beyond their supposed effective range. The German pilots were stunned. A tail gunner firing at them from this distance. It was unheard of. It was foolish. The bullets fell harmlessly short, but that wasn't the point. Donovan wasn't trying to shoot them down. Not yet. He was trying to rattle them. He was painting a target on the lead pilot, the man orchestrating the entire attack. The German commander, expecting a passive target, suddenly had tracers flashing all around his cockpit. Instinct took over. He broke formation, jinking to avoid the incoming fire, even though it posed no real threat. And when the leader broke, the entire formation dissolved into chaos. The perfectly coordinated company front attack fell apart. Instead of 12 fighters attacking as one, Donovan was now facing 12 individual pilots, each acting on their own. He had broken their symphony of destruction. Now he could pick them off one by one. This was his gamble. He was betting his life and the lives of his 9 crewmates. On a radical theory, the best defense is a good and very, very early offense. And the German pilots, confused and angry, were flying right into his trap. His crewmates over the intercom were frantic. "What are you doing, Donovan? You're wasting ammo. They're not in range." But Donovan ignored them. He was in his own world, a bubble of cold glass and roaring machine guns. He saw the first Bf-109 peel away from the disorganized mob and begin its attack run. This was it, the moment of truth. Donovan didn't wait. He laid his sights just ahead of the fighter's nose and let loose a long, sustained burst. The German pilot, likely assuming the gunner would fire directly at him, flew straight into the wall of lead. The tracers stitched across the Messerschmitt's engine, cowling. A flicker of orange, then a plume of thick black smoke. The fighter wobbled, its propeller slowing, and then it nosed over, beginning a long, silent spiral toward the German countryside below. One down, but there were 11 more. The intercom crackled again, this time with a different tone. It wasn't panic anymore. It was disbelief. "You got him. My God, you actually got him." The rest of the crew, who had been bracing for impact, now had a glimmer of hope. Donovan hadn't just shot down an enemy plane. He had proven his crazy idea might just work. The other German pilots, seeing their comrade fall, were enraged. They abandoned any pretense of a coordinated attack and came at the B-17 from all angles, like sharks in a feeding frenzy. This is exactly what Donovan had wanted. A disciplined formation was a nightmare. A chaotic free-for-all was a target-rich environment. Another Bf-109 dove from high and to the right. Donovan swung his heavy turret, leading the target smoothly. He fired. The canopy of the German fighter shattered. The pilot, likely killed instantly, slumped over his controls, and the plane tumbled out of the sky. 2 down. Then another came from the left. Donovan met him with another burst. This one exploded, the fuselage disintegrating in a flash of fuel and fire. 3 down. Wasn't just defending his bomber, he was hunting. He was using his position not as a last line of defense, but as an offensive weapon. The tail of the B-17 had become the most dangerous place in the sky. He was no longer the prey. He was the predator. The air around the Thunderbird was a crisscrossing web of tracer fire. Cannon shells from the remaining Bf-19s tore through the bomber's fuselage, and the plane shuddered with each impact. Donovan was hit. Shrapnel from a 20mm shell tore through his leg and his flak vest. The pain was searing, but the adrenaline was a fire in his veins. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the blood soaking through his flight suit, and focused on the next target. A German fighter was closing fast, its machine guns blinking. Donovan swung his guns around, the barrels now glowing hot, and fired. The stream of 50-caliber rounds caught the Bf-109 in the wing root. The wing simply tore off, and the fighter cartwheeled into oblivion. 4 down. The battle had been raging for less than 2 minutes. The volume of fire was immense. The barrels of his machine guns were overheating, but there was no time to let them cool. The fight was now at point-blank range, a desperate knife fight in the sky. Donovan kept firing. He had a preternatural sense of where the next attack would come from. He saw a fighter climbing from below, trying to hit the bomber's vulnerable belly. Donovan depressed his guns to their lowest limit and fired, walking the tracers right into the enemy's cockpit. 5 down. 2 more tried a coordinated pass from either side. He fired at the one on the left, forcing him to break off, then immediately switched to the one on the right, hitting him square in the engine. 6 down. It was an unbelievable display of gunnery. His crewmates, who had been calling out enemy positions, went silent. They were simply watching in awe. The radio operator later said it was like watching an artist at work, a deadly, brutal, but undeniably masterful artist. Through the pain, the noise, and the chaos, Donovan was in a state of pure flow, his mind, his body, and his guns acting as one. The remaining German pilots, who had started their attack with arrogance and confidence, were now fighting for their own lives against a single wounded gunner. The 7th, 8th, and 9th fighters fell in quick succession. One had its tail shot off. Another simply disintegrated under the sheer weight of fire. The 9th pilot, his plane crippled, bailed out, his white parachute a lonely flower against the blue sky. There were only 3 left. They had had enough. These were veteran pilots, aces of the Luftwaffe, but they had never seen anything like this. They were supposed to be the hunters, but they were being slaughtered. They broke off the attack, diving away, choosing to live and fight another day. But Donovan wasn't finished. As one of the fleeing fighters presented its tail, Donovan sent one last, long burst after it. The tracers found their mark, and the 10th Bf-109 began to smoke, its escape turning into an uncontrolled dive. Then, miraculously, as 2 other fighters from a different squadron drawn by the battle appeared, Donovan, in a final act of defiance, fired at them. They were so shocked by the aggression from a lone, crippled bomber that they immediately broke off and fled. In the space of just 4 minutes, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan had single-handedly engaged 12, arguably 14, enemy fighters and had verifiably shot down at least 10 of them. When the adrenaline finally faded, the pain hit him like a freight train. He slumped in his seat, his leg a mess, his body bruised and battered. The barrels of his twin, 50 cals were warped and drooping from the intense heat. He had fired over 2,000 rounds. The tail section of the Thunderbird was riddled with holes, a testament to the ferocity of the fight. But they were alive. The bomber, though heavily damaged, was still flying. Donovan's suicidal tactic had worked. He had saved his crew. His actions were so extraordinary that they were initially met with disbelief. No gunner had ever achieved anything close to this. But the mission debrief, the accounts of his crew, and even later confirmations from German records proved his story. Donovan's method, dubbed the Donovan attack, was studied and quickly adopted by other bomber crews. He had proven that aggression, even from a defensive position, could be a powerful weapon. He fundamentally changed the doctrine of bomber defense. Gunners were now trained to fire early, to disrupt formations, and to seize the initiative. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan was awarded the Medal of Honor for his incredible bravery and skill. His citation reads, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." But perhaps his greatest legacy was the countless lives saved by the new tactics he pioneered. He showed that one person's courage and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom could change the course of history. Even from a tiny seat at the back of a bomber 23,000 feet over enemy territory. He didn't just survive, he dominated. He didn't just defend, he attacked. And in doing so, he became a legend of the skies. March 6, 1944. 23,000 feet over Germany. A lone B-17 flying fortress, lumbering through the hostile skies, suddenly finds itself the focus of 12 Messerschmitt Bf 19s. In the cramped, cold tail gun position, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan watches the German fighters form up for attack. He can see the yellow noses, the black crosses, the deadly intent in their precise, predatory movements. Every ounce of his training, every line in the manual screamed at him, "Fire defensively. Conserve your ammunition. Wait for them to come into range. Above all, just try to survive." But Donovan saw something else. He saw a flaw in their perfection, a moment of vulnerability in their textbook formation. And in that split second, common sense went out the window. Donovan decided to attack first. This wasn't just a deviation from the plan. It was unheard of. Tail gunner, the last line of defense, proactively engaging a dozen of the Luftwaffe's finest. It was madness. It was suicidal. The standard procedure for German fighters attacking a B-17 was a coordinated sequential pass. They would line up one after the other and pour fire into the bomber from its most vulnerable angle, the rear. The tail gunner's job was to disrupt this deadly ballet, to make each pass as costly as possible for the attacker, hoping to damage one or two before being overwhelmed. It was a reactive role, a desperate game of survival against overwhelming odds. Donovan's crewmates, hearing the unexpected chatter of his twin, .50 calibers, must have thought he'd lost his mind. He was firing long before the 109s were in their optimal attack range, seemingly wasting precious ammunition on targets that were still hundreds of yards away. But Donovan wasn't just spraying and praying. He had seen that the German pilots, confident in their numbers and their proven tactics, were flying in a tight, predictable line. They were so focused on setting up their perfect firing solution that they had neglected their own defensive awareness. Donovan's suicidal long-range burst wasn't aimed at the lead fighter. It was aimed ahead of him. He was leading the target not by a few feet, but by what must have seemed like an eternity. He wasn't just shooting at a plane. He was laying a trap made of lead. His first burst of tracers sliced through the air, a brilliant, terrifying line drawn across the sky. The lead German pilot, caught completely by surprise, instinctively jerked his plane to avoid the unexpected stream of bullets. This was exactly what Donovan had anticipated. The pilot's sudden, evasive maneuver sent him careening directly into the path of the fighter flying just behind him. The sky, which moments before had been a canvas of cold, orderly precision, erupted into a fireball of tangled metal. 2 Bf 109s gone, not from a direct hit, but from a chain reaction started by a gunner who dared to break the rules. The remaining 10 pilots, their perfect formation now shattered, were thrown into confusion. Their synchronized attack had devolved into chaos. For a tail gunner, this moment of chaos was a golden opportunity. Before the Germans could regroup, Donovan's guns were chattering again, this time with deadly accuracy. He wasn't just a defender anymore. He was a predator. The B-17 pilots, feeling the shudder of Donovan's guns but seeing no immediate threat on their nose, could only listen in astonishment over the intercom. The frantic calls from the other gunners painted a picture of disbelief. One by one, Donovan was picking off the disoriented German fighters. He targeted an engine here, a cockpit there, another 109 trailing smoke, spiraled downwards, then another. The German pilots, who had begun their attack with the cold confidence of hunters, were now the hunted. They were scrambling to escape the unholy hail of fire coming from the tail of this one single bomber. What was supposed to be an easy kill had turned into a meat grinder. In the span of less than 4 minutes, a dozen of Germany's elite fighter pilots were decimated. The sky that had been swarming with enemies was now eerily empty, save for the drifting smoke trails of downed aircraft. Back at base, the debriefing was tense. Donovan's story sounded impossible. Firing early, causing a collision, and then single-handedly shooting down several more. It defied all known tactics and probabilities. The initial report was met with skepticism, even suspicion, but the evidence was undeniable. The other crew members corroborated the story. The gun camera footage, once developed, was breathtaking. It showed Donovan's initial long-range burst, the shocking collision, and the subsequent takedowns of the remaining fighters in brutal close-up detail. The numbers were confirmed: 12 enemy aircraft destroyed or forced to disengage, all credited to the actions of one tail gunner. Michael Donovan hadn't just survived, he had dominated. He had turned the tail gun, a defensive position, into an offensive weapon of incredible power. The impact of Donovan's action rippled through the entire 8th Air Force. His Luftwaffe tactic, named after the World War I ace Raoul Luftwaffe, who pioneered a similar defensive circle for aircraft, was quickly analyzed and disseminated. Gunner training was fundamentally altered. What was once considered a suicidal waste of ammunition was now taught as a viable, proactive defensive strategy. Gunners were encouraged to fire long-range scare bursts to disrupt enemy formations, to force them to break off their attack runs before they even began. It was a psychological shift as much as a tactical one. It empowered the gunners, giving them a way to seize the initiative rather than simply waiting for their turn to be shot at. This change in doctrine is credited with saving countless bombers and their crews in the final brutal year of the air war over Europe. Michael Donovan's 4 minutes of inspired madness on March 6, 1944, became the stuff of legend. It was a testament to the idea that in the heat of battle, sometimes the greatest weapon is the refusal to follow the rules. By thinking outside the box, by turning a defensive position into an offensive one, he not only saved his crew, but also changed the very nature of aerial combat. His story reminds us that history is often written not by those who follow orders, but by those who have the courage to defy them when it matters most. It's a powerful lesson in innovation and bravery that echoes from the skies of World War II to this day. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this piece of history, make sure to like and subscribe for more.